Hello, everybody. I am so excited to be back here for the Thrive Wrap Up webinar. It's not quite the end of November, but I know that a lot of us are traveling the rest of this weekend, or like me, maybe you're hosting multiple family members. Maybe it's just a regular Thursday and you are just preparing for the last push, but I wanted to check in so that we can make the most of the time that we have left in November, think constructively about what worked and maybe what could use more support as we move forward, and then talk a little bit about how to keep the magic of AcWriMo moving throughout the whole year. So the first thing that I would say is that if you're here or you're listening or you're encountering this at all, you're already in the top 10% of finishers of AcWriMo. One of the blessings and challenges of AcWriMo is that it comes in November, and November, sort of no matter what your hemisphere is, no matter what your holiday traditions are, no matter what your school schedule is, November seems to be a really busy time of year. We're all busy. Academics are always busy all of the time, but this in particular is an extremely busy season. So if you are here, you're checking in, you're doing your best, you're trying to stay on track, then you're already doing it. You've already finished, you've already won AcWriMo. I know that there's so much pressure to make it quantifiable. I want 10,000 words. I want, 50 new pages. I want to have all of these publications off my desk. And in my experience, those goals are great. They're easier to measure. It's a lot easier to track how far you are in your progress if you wanted to write so many words and then you've gotten, halfway or 2/3. But to me, the real goals and the real sustainable change, the real habit work comes from the resilience of AcWriMo. It comes from trying again. It comes from getting sick over the weekend and losing 4 days and trying again when you get back to your desk. It comes from getting that piece of writing rejected for the 4th time and revising it to yet another set of comments and sending that back off your desk. It comes from making a goal and realizing that it's unreasonable, and instead of just quitting, refining the goal, changing your strategies. So it's really easy to say that AcWriMo is kind of like a binary thing. You either achieve your goals or you don't. But I have found that the people who really give themselves a chance to try some new styles of working, to try some new habits, to try some new ways of thinking about their writing practice and how it fits into their life as opposed to how it is their life. Those are the people that tend to have the most long-term benefits from AcWriMo. In the short term, it's great to get a paper off your desk. It's great to get, farther. It's great to get that proposal done. It's great to get that book chapter drafted. But it's even better to learn that you can try a new tool. It's even better to learn that you're more resilient than you thought. It's even better to learn that there's new ways to think about your writing that fit into your life. So if you're just joining us, I really want you to hear me loud and clear when I say that if you are engaged, if you're still thinking about AcWriMo, if you're still working, if you are still trying to get to that finish line, then you're doing it. You've already won. But I do want to kind of step through a 3-part thing today. So we're going to talk a little bit, and this is a format that if you've worked with me in any other venue or if you've listened to some of the other webinars, I think there's 3 really important things to do whenever we reach some sort of a check-in point. The natural check-in point is at the end of a period, so like the end of something like AcWriMo, or maybe it's when you submit a chapter. But this 3-part system can work anytime you really just need to have a milestone and adjust your strategies. So we'll talk a little bit about evaluating, evaluating the progress, seeing what's working and what could be a little bit different, reflecting and refining strategies, so making changes to move forward, and then 3, making and setting new plans and new goals. So feel free to throw. I see that there's some chatter in the window. If you have questions or specific concerns or strategies you'd like to hear me talk about, you can always throw that in there. I am keeping my eye on it. So if you see my eyes dart over there, that's what I'm doing. But first, let's talk about the idea of evaluation. Because evaluation is one of those loaded words that can bring up thoughts like grading. It can bring, performance reviews, end of semester check-ins, grades. It can be a really weighted process, especially for academics. We're used to evaluation being a time where we get mostly praise and maybe a few constructive things. And then we really want those evaluation periods to feel good. But I have noticed that many people, and myself included, tend to over-focus in evaluation periods on what isn't working and what needs more support and what could be going better and what feels a little underdeveloped. And I think part of that is because when you are at the top of your game, and if you're an academic, even if you're a grad school, you're at the top of your game, you're at the top of your field. It's easier to focus on what you need to do to get to that next level than it is to give credit for all of this stuff that's gotten you to where you are so far. So as we sit down to evaluate how this month is gone, whether it's today or 2 days from now or next week, Monday, or whenever you're listening to this, and it'll be up on my channel, so you can come back anytime. If your first tendency is to evaluate the stuff that isn't working, I would really challenge you to sit down and think about what stuff was effective. So was it effective for you in AcWriMo to go into the Slack room in the morning and see if there was anybody working in the Palms channel that you could work along with? Was it really effective in the first part of the month when you had really clear goals and you knew what projects were going to take your priority? Was it really effective to have an accountability sheet where you had a regular check-in and you knew that people were going to look at it and it was going to see it? Was it really helpful for you to have a daily POM goal where you said, I'm going to try and do 4 POMs a day? So what things worked really well? And it didn't need to work really well that whole month for it to be good data for you. I know that sometimes we can discount the short-term effective strategies. So maybe it's not practical for you, and for many of us it's true. Maybe it's not practical for you to spend 4 hours or 4 POMs a day on your academic writing. But when you had a concrete number of minute goals, then maybe it became a little bit easier to know or measure where your effort was going, as opposed to the kind of undefined nether region of this chapter I'm working on, and I'll know that I'm on track when it's done. So think through what things worked well, what things got you excited. I'm seeing in the chat that people really liked Slack. Good news for everybody, that room is going to stay open. It's yours to sort of keep, and I'm going to be hosting maybe some special things in December, so keep your eyes peeled for that in an email coming up. But think about the stuff that got you excited. Was it the fact that you did AcWriMo with people in your department and it felt exciting to make that goal? Did it really help you to be scrolling through Instagram and see posts about your writing inside of your feed about yarn or ice and cookies or whatever else it is that you look at on your Instagram? That's what I look at on mine. But think about what things really did help you and then move from there. So it's not to say that we didn't all have areas that could have been improved, but if you're always focusing on what needs to be better, it becomes really demotivating after a while, because we're never acknowledging the hard work. We're only ever focusing on where we're falling short. And not focusing on the hard work doesn't make it not exist. It just means that we're not feeling the rewards of that accomplishment, even if that reward is just an internal pat on the back. So I would really encourage you, when you sit down and think about what worked and what didn't over AcWriMo, to start first with what worked well. And then you can move to what didn't work. So many of us will say, well, AcWriMo didn't work because I didn't meet all of my goals, or I only met one of my goals, or I was 100 pages short, sort of whatever the measurement that you were using is. But I would really encourage you to be more specific. So was it that it was really hard for you to make it to your desk on a day that you were teaching? Is it that you got some pretty brutal feedback from a supervisor about a draft and that made it hard to go back to it for a week? Is it that you fell off the daily habit wagon for no reason at all, and then you And then you just sort of didn't want to face that to-do sheet. You didn't want to face the Slack room. You didn't want to go on the accountability sheet. So thinking about specifically what needed a little bit support. Was it that you engaged in some avoidance behaviors? Was it that you were really asking yourself to set and keep unreasonable goals? Is it that you were consistently underestimating the amount of time it would take for you to accomplish things? So instead of thinking, well, I'm just evaluating. Obviously, AcWriMo didn't work because it didn't meet my goals. Really drilling down and seeing if you can figure out what things triggered you to get out of the daily habits that supported you, what things happened that made it difficult to keep going with your goals, and then what things were in your control and what things weren't. So I know that for me, anybody who's seen me on these webinars know that I started the month on November 1st, really sick. And then I had a flare of my chronic illness, and I have just not been feeling my best during November. I've been making it to my desk most days. I have been, but I've also been dealing with some low energy and some fatigue. So a lot of my AcWriMo goals were specifically longer term projects that needed a lot of focus. And most days I barely got done what needed to get done because it was actively on fire for my clients or for, kind of ongoing projects. And that doesn't mean that AcWriMo failed, but it means that I didn't have a lot of control over the cold that I got, over the sort of physical health dips that I had. I know that there have been all sorts of things that have happened to people in November. You could have had massive changes in your family structure. You could have had, I know in the accountability sheet, there were sick family members and changes in grant funding and all sorts of other things. So when you're thinking about places to evaluate, make sure that you're making a distinction between these are the things that I could have control over. I made a choice to watch all of season 2 of Grey's Anatomy, or, I really couldn't have controlled the fact that I got the flu and was down for 10 days, but I am proud of the fact that I bounced back. So when you're thinking about evaluation and looking at those places that needed more support, think about and give yourself credit for the stuff that you need to adjust for, but that you didn't ask. Just the habits can always be restarted. Goals can always be reflected, which redefined, restructured, which is what we're coming in. And so people in the chat are saying that I didn't make my goal due to circumstances totally out of my control. The habit started the first 2 weeks, helped me get back into the flow for the rest of the year. And this is something that I absolutely agree with. So when it brings us to our second thing, which is, reflecting, refining, and figuring out a plan, a set of strategies to move forward. So the best thing about habits is that they're durable. Anybody who has ever fallen asleep without brushing their teeth knows that you wake up the next morning, you brush your teeth, the habit stays the same, even though you might have forgotten to do it one night. Once that habit is established, it becomes much easier to get it started again, as opposed to when you were maybe 2 or 3 learning to brush your teeth where every time it was a chore. And I find that a lot of daily writing habits are exactly like that. In the beginning, when we're building a new habit, it can feel like a ton of effort and brain space. I know that when I was starting with my morning pages habit, which is when you start every morning with 750 words or kind of 3 pages longhand of writing, that the first 3 weeks, it was torture. I didn't want to write. I didn't feel like writing. Sometimes it felt good after a while, but it was really, really hard to keep that pages habit going in the beginning where it was still new and I was still building that muscle and figuring out how it fit into my day. But now that I've been doing morning pages off and on, but pretty consistently for the last year, it's a lot easier because I know what to expect. I know how it feels. I know what the benefits are. It's easier for me to see where I'm lacking when that habit is missing. So even if I say have 2 weeks where I don't get to it, it's easier to get back started again. So thinking about your habits like that a habit doesn't go away just because we take a break from it, whether that break is intentional or unintentional. The work that you put in to establish that habit pays off in the long run. I can promise you that. But The other thing to sort of pay attention to with daily habits is that not every habit and not every strategy is going to work for every person in every season of their life. I was working with a client this week who was saying that, they have tried for years to become an early morning writer. They wanted to be somebody who got up, they were at their desk at 6 a.m., they wrote for 2 hours, and then they had the rest of their day to do as they pleased. And they have tried for 2 years to go to bed early enough to be at their desk, to have all of the supplies. They've tried all sorts of, bribery systems and reward systems. And I asked them, I said, well, what if you're just never going to be a morning person? What if you were just never going to be a 6 a.m. writer? And it was both a moment of kind of real deep grief, like this is a goal that I wanted, this is something that I really was invested in trying, but there's also a freedom in saying, if the goal is to have a daily writing habit, I don't necessarily need to do it at 6 a.m. I might never be a 6 a.m. person, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to be an 11 a.m. person or a whatever time I get to it, but I always do get to it person. So if you are trying a habit for the second time, the third time, the fourth time, and it never seems to get any easier, then try thinking about, okay, if the specific circumstances around this goal or this habit or this routine that I'm trying to establish aren't working right now, what's another way that I can accomplish the goal, which might be a daily writing habit, without the same set of constraints? It might be that your daily writing habit isn't daily at all. It might be that you have found that on days that you teach, you cannot, no matter how hard you try, find a way to squeeze it into that schedule. So your daily writing habit means daily except for the days that I'm teaching. And then it becomes a sense of freedom that you can be fully invested in your teaching. You don't have to worry about trying to squeeze it in those palms, but you do know that if it's a day that you're not teaching, that it's a precious resource and you do have to prioritize it for your own writing, for your own work, for your own space. So thinking through the kind of goal that the habit was supposed to help you with, and then imagining if there's different ways to accomplish that. So much of the writing advice out there is advice that starts from the premise of this is what worked for me, and I'm explaining how it worked for me so that it might work for you. But I always tell my clients to vet any advice against the sort of the ways that it meshes with your life. So if the person giving you this advice that they work every morning from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. is a single person in their 20s with no kids or dependents and a fairly stable schedule, then maybe it really works for them to work in the morning because they have complete control over when they go to bed. There's nobody that they're responsible for caretaking in the morning, and they have a lot of space to manipulate the conditions of their day to best suit that writing. I know that for me, there's enough moving pieces in my life that 6 a.m. is never going to be something that is going to be consistent. And that might also be true for people who are caretakers, for people who are parents, for anyone who just knows that no matter how hard they try, they're not going to fall asleep by 9 p.m. every night. So thinking through, okay, if this person is suggesting that this tool works, do I have the same set of capabilities to control the conditions of my life that they do? And if I don't, then how can I distill what this goal or this habit or this routine is meant to impart to me and make it fit in my schedule? Habits are great and routines are important. And I would never, ever say, like, let's all move to a habit-free existence or a routine-free existence, because I think that that's not effective. But the best part about habits and routines is that they take some of that pressure of decision-making out of the moment. So I don't know about you, but anytime I sit down and make my to-do list, it's easier for me to know that I have to fit in 2 poems of writing if I've decided in advance that I'm writing for 2 poems every day this week. And that's because I outsource that decision to Sunday night Katie, who can have a full view of her schedule, who can see what's coming, and who has the sort of optimism. But if I wait for Monday morning Katie to make the decision about how much writing we're going to do, Monday morning Katie also always feels a ton of stress about the way that the week is going, usually feels tired, could be out of coffee, and might or might not give those 2 poems away to something else. So letting your best self make those decisions in advance can say, okay, you know what? My habit is just that I write 2 poems every morning before I get started, or that I always sit down and make my to-do list at the end of the day, no matter what, even if it has to be, sort of a skeleton version of that habit. I'm going to commit to doing it every day for 3 weeks to see how it works. But letting yourself, your best self, make the decisions about how you're going to spend your time makes it so that you don't need to um, evaluate the priorities, the stakes, and the way that's going to work every single minute of the day. When you decide in advance, from Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays from 1 until 3, this is when I'm doing my writing. Then when somebody on Tuesday says, hey, can we meet from 1 until 2 tomorrow? You can say, no, I'm already booked, because my past self decided that this is when my writing time is. I am a very big fan of never leaving your desk without a plan for what you're going to do the next time you show up, which sort of brings us to our third point, which is, how am I going to move forward from this? How am I going to take what I've learned from AcWriMo and make it so that it's actionable in December or in January or over the break or whenever you want to use it again? And I would say that the most important thing is that you don't need to know what the whole plan is going to be. You don't need to know every step of what you're going to do in December, but knowing where your first step is can be such a game changer. And I mean this both for sort of macro level big plans, but also the micro level. So I don't know about you, but when I break to go to lunch, chances are that when I return back to my desk, optimistically in a half hour, realistically more like 45 minutes, an hour, that I have forgotten what I was thinking about, what I wanted to start with, what things were most important. And it's very often my habit that I sit back down at my desk, I start doing my emails, and then all of a sudden it's 4 p.m. I meant to write and I didn't. And it's because I didn't take the time right before I break for lunch to decide what I was going to do when I sit down. So my desk is covered in Post-it notes. I have them everywhere. But I will, anytime that I end a work session, so whether that's my morning work block or my afternoon block or sometimes my evening block, I always sit down and say, okay, when I get back to my desk, I'm going to start with this. I'm going to start with this piece of editing. I'm going to start with my emails. I'm going to start with writing. But knowing what I'm going to do first helps me remember what my priorities are. This is a really great habit to get into at the end of the day as well, especially on the end of the day on Friday or anytime you're going to be leaving your desk. Because if I have trouble remembering what I'm supposed to be doing over lunch, you can bet that I'm going to have trouble remembering what I'm supposed to be doing when I get back to my desk on Monday after a long holiday weekend. So sitting down, leaving notes for myself and saying, this is what I want to start with. This is the structure. This is where I want to be. Can help make that so that it's accessible to me. But it also works on a macro level. So as you might be wrapping up a big project, that dissertation chapter is done, that prospectus is done, what's going to happen next? So say the next is you finished chapter 2 and now it's chapter 3. Knowing where you're going to start in the process for chapter 3 can make the whole planning process for that next set of goals so much more clear. As with any big long-term project, the plan is just a best estimate of what you're going to do and what you roughly think the timing might be. But figuring out, I know that I want to start with rereading this chapter description from my prospectus, or I know I want to start with pulling up my notes from the archives that I went to 2 years ago. Or I know that I want to start this with having a meeting with my lab manager where we go through all of the data that we've collected so far. But knowing and identifying that first step can really help you make the next set of goals concrete. Some of what the magic of AcWriMo is for so many people is that you sit down, you plan for the whole month, and you decide in advance what the milestones are going to be, what the deliverables are, and what habits and routines you might need to get there. So if you take anything from the experience of AcWriMo, I would say take one of the huge tools, which is the power and the motivation of having a plan. Not a contract, not something that when things go not according to plan, and things will not go according to plan, I promise you that, you have at least a rough draft of the steps that you think you might follow, a rough draft of how much time it might take, a rough draft of what you're going to need to move from one stage to the next. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be something that you can execute flawlessly without any, unexpected surprises or bumps in the road. But just like a rough draft of your writing, it's a pretty good guess. And once you have that plan, it's a lot easier to revise it and switch it. So take into account what you've learned in terms of what really made you feel motivated. Take into account the habits that you want to build. Take into account the things that felt really sticky this month, and maybe put in 1 or 2 new habits to help support those trouble areas, whether that is bouncing back from feedback or, coming back to your desk after an unintentional break. But take the data that you have from everything that you've worked on so far and use it to make a new rough draft of the plan for what you're going to do, and experiment with different cadences. So it might be that you really like to take a half day every month and plan out the next month. This is a rhythm that works pretty well for me, actually. And anybody who's listened to the latest episode of Katie Linder's podcast that I am the guest coach on, I was talking to her and revealing that I don't actually plan calendar month to calendar month, but I do plan lunar cycle to lunar cycle, so like 28 days at a time. But I like to take, a couple of hours out. It usually takes me about 2 hours to sit down and reflect about what worked well, think about what things need to be supported, review all of my obligations, figure out what deadlines are, check back in with long-term projects, and then really start to make actionable checkpoints for each one of those weeks inside of that 28-day period. But it might be that for you, there's so many moving pieces that a month is too long. And you really have to break it down into, this 2-week sprint, what am I going to do? And then next 2 weeks, what am I going to do? And then next 2 weeks. And for some people, you might be in a stage where all you can do is 3 days, or maybe all you can do is a week, or maybe you're working with, collaborators and you have to check in anytime you feel like you need to check in. But going through this kind of 3-part step of saying, okay, what's working and what isn't? What do I need to refine? And what are my next steps? Is going to be a really good framework, whether it's AcWriMo or not, to take the data from the work that you have so far and translate it into ever better, ever more accurate planning steps, sequences, and supportive habits. So I have a couple minutes left if there's any questions, but it's been my absolute honor and privilege to host everybody for this AcWri challenge. There's a couple more things that are coming, so stay tuned Monday for a big wrap-up email about ways to kind of concretely move this forward. You still have one Thursday check-in that should be hitting your inboxes tomorrow morning, Eastern time. But I am just very grateful for everybody's energy and enthusiasm this month. As I said, it's been sort of a difficult month for me personally, but there has been nothing more exciting or supportive than logging into Slack and seeing everybody cheering each other on, or looking at everybody's updates in the accountability spreadsheet. I'm really proud and happy to have built such a vibrant and supportive and awesome community with, most of all, your help and your support and your commitment. So no matter what this week looks like for you, I'm wishing you motivation and excitement for this last little push of November, and I can't wait to see where we go in the future. Talk to everybody soon, and happy almost end of AcWriMo.